In the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, where death lurks behind every rock and betrayal hides in every shadow, the enemy made one fatal mistake. They thought capturing Commander Jake would break his team. They thought his location, buried deep in a Taliban stronghold surrounded by 50 armed fighters, made him untouchable. They thought wrong. What they didn't know was that Lieutenant Sarah, Ghost, had been walking through hell her entire life, and she was about to bring that hell straight to their doorstep. This is the true story of the most audacious rescue mission in modern military history, where one woman's unwavering loyalty turned her into a legend that enemy forces still whisper about in fear. Some bonds are forged in blood. Some promises are kept at any cost. And sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody sees coming. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rugged Afghan landscape as Lieutenant Sarah checked her gear for the third time. Her hands moved with practiced precision, each piece of equipment finding its designated place on her tactical vest. The weight felt familiar, comforting even. In 12 hours, she would either be celebrating the successful completion of Operation Silent Thunder, or she would be dead. Ghost, you ready for this? Commander Jake's voice carried the easy confidence that had earned him the loyalty of every soldier under his command. At 34, was the youngest SEAL commander in recent history, and his team respected him not just for his rank, but for the way he led from the front. Sarah looked up from her rifle, meeting his steady gaze. "Born ready, sir." The nickname Ghost had stuck after her first deployment, when she had managed to infiltrate and extract intel from 3 separate enemy compounds without leaving a trace. Her ability to move unseen and unheard had become legendary among the teams. The briefing tent buzzed with quiet energy as the 8-member team gathered around the tactical map, pointed to a cluster of buildings marked in red. Intelligence indicates that the Taliban's chief logistics coordinator for this region will be meeting with his cell leaders at this compound tonight. This is our chance to take out a major piece of their supply network. The Staff Sergeant Mike, their communications specialist, leaned forward. "Sir, what about the civilian population in the area? Latest reconnaissance shows at least 20 non-combatants in the nearby villages." "We've accounted for that," replied, his finger tracing their planned route. We go in fast and quiet, neutralize the targets, gather intelligence, and extract before dawn. Minimal collateral damage, maximum impact. Sarah studied the compound layout, memorizing every detail. The main building sat in the center of a natural depression, surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided excellent cover for both attack and defense. Two guard towers flanked the entrance, and thermal imaging had revealed at least 15 armed fighters patrolling the perimeter. What's our backup plan if things go sideways? Asked Petty Officer Carlos, their demolitions expert. His question hung in the air, a reminder that in their line of work, even the best plans could unravel in seconds. His expression grew serious. Standard protocol. If we're compromised, we fall back to Rally Point Alpha, 7 clicks north of the target. If anyone gets separated, you know the drill. Wait for extraction or make your own way to the secondary rendezvous. The team spent the next 3 hours rehearsing the operation, running through scenarios and contingencies until every movement became second nature. Sarah found herself paired with for the initial breach, a partnership that had proven successful in previous missions. Their ability to communicate without words, to anticipate each other's actions, had saved their lives more than once. As evening approached, the team moved into position. The journey to the target compound took them across 12 miles of hostile territory, through valleys where the enemy had laid countless improvised explosive devices, and over where sniper positions commanded sweeping fields of fire. They moved like ghosts themselves, utilizing every scrap of cover, every shadow. Sarah's training kicked in as they approached the compound. Her breathing slowed, her dropping to the steady rhythm that marked her transition into what she privately called the zone. In this state, her senses became, time seemed to slow, and the complex calculations of distance, cover, and threat assessment became as natural as breathing. The compound appeared exactly as intelligence had described. Two guards manned the towers, their attention focused outward on the approaches rather than on the rocky ground immediately below. Thermal imaging confirmed 15 fighters inside the main building, with another dozen scattered throughout the smaller structures. As hand signals were crisp and clear in the moonlight, and would circle to the north, creating a diversion that would draw attention away from the main assault. Sarah and would breach from the east, moving through the building to neutralize the primary targets. The remaining team members would secure the perimeter and provide overwatch. Everything went perfectly for the first 40 minutes. Carefully placed charges created the illusion of a much larger force attacking from the north, drawing guards away from their posts. Sarah and slipped into the compound like shadows, their night vision goggles turning the darkness into a green-tinted world of perfect clarity. They moved through the building methodically, room by room. Sarah's weapon remained steady as they encountered the first guards, her suppressed rifle eliminating threats with surgical precision. Covered their six, his own weapon tracking smoothly across potential threat angles. The intelligence had been accurate. They found in the central room, surrounded by maps and communication equipment. The brief firefight that followed left no room for mistakes, and his lieutenants were eliminated, and Sarah quickly gathered the intelligence materials while secured the room. "A package secured," whispered into his comm unit. "A beginning extraction." That's when everything went wrong. The explosion came without warning, a massive blast that shook the entire building and sent debris raining down from the ceiling. Sarah was thrown against the wall, her helmet cracking against the concrete. Through the ringing in her ears, she could hear shouting commands, but his words seemed to come from a great distance. "IED, they knew we were coming." His voice cut through the chaos as he hauled Sarah to her feet. Blood trickled down her face from a gash above her left eye, but she was functional. The building had become a trap. Whoever had fed them the intelligence about this meeting had also informed the Taliban about their planned assault. Now they found themselves in the center of a kill zone, with enemy fighters closing in from all directions. "Team report," called into his radio, but only static answered. Either their communications were being jammed, or their teammates were no longer able to respond. Sarah checked her ammunition as surveyed their options. They were on the second floor of the building, with only one stairway leading down to the ground level. Through the windows, she could see muzzle flashes as enemy fighters took positions around the compound. They had perhaps 2 minutes before the building would be completely surrounded. "Sir, the roof," Sarah pointed upward. "We can use the drainage system to reach the outer wall." Nodded grimly. They had trained for this scenario, but training and reality were vastly different things. The roof access was through a narrow hatch that would leave them exposed for precious seconds, and the drainage system was a series of concrete channels barely wide enough for a human body. They made it to the roof just as the first enemy fighters reached the second floor. Sarah could hear boots pounding on the stairs below as she squeezed through the hatch, close behind her. The roof provided a clear view of their situation, and it was worse than they had feared. At least 30 Taliban fighters had surrounded the compound, with more arriving every minute. The vehicles parked around the perimeter included a technical truck mounted with a heavy machine gun, and Sarah spotted the distinctive shape of rocket-propelled grenade launchers among the enemy weapons. The drainage channel leads to the north wall, whispered, pointing to the concrete structure that would provide their only route to safety. Once we're over the wall, it's 800 meters to the rally point. 800 meters of open ground, with 30 enemy fighters between them and freedom. Sarah calculated the odds automatically, a habit drilled into her through years of training. They were not good. The drainage channel was even narrower than it had appeared from below. Sarah went first, her body scraping against the rough concrete as she crawled through the suffocating darkness. Behind her, she could hear struggling to fit his larger frame through the tight space. They emerged at the base of the north wall just as searchlights began sweeping the compound. Sarah pressed herself against the concrete, feeling the rough texture through her tactical vest. The wall was 12 feet high, topped with razor wire. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a routine obstacle. Tonight, with enemy fighters closing in and their teams scattered or dead, it might as well have been a mountain. I produced a small grappling hook from his kit, a piece of equipment that had saved their lives before. The hook caught on the first throw, and Sarah began climbing immediately. Her muscles burned as she pulled herself up the rope, each movement calculated to minimize noise and exposure. She was halfway up the wall when the searchlight found them. The shouting started immediately, followed by the sharp crack of AK-47 fire. Bullets sparked off the concrete around her as Sarah continued climbing, knowing that stopping now meant certain death. Was right behind her, his return fire keeping some of the enemy fighters pinned down. Sarah rolled over the top of the wall and immediately took position to provide covering fire for ascent. Her rifle barked repeatedly as she engaged targets in the compound, buying precious seconds for her commander to reach safety. Cleared the wall just as the heavy machine gun opened fire, its larger rounds chewing chunks of concrete from the wall where they had been moments before. They sprinted across the open ground toward the rally point, weaving between rocks and using every available piece of cover. Behind them, the enemy fighters poured out of the compound in pursuit. Sarah could hear vehicles starting up, the rumble of engines mixing with shouted commands in Pashto. They had perhaps a 5-minute head start before the hunt began in earnest. The rally point was a cluster of boulders arranged in a natural defensive position, located on a that provided good fields of fire in all directions. Sarah and reached it just as the first enemy vehicles appeared in the distance, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Still no contact with the team, reported after trying his radio again. The static that answered his calls was ominous. In Sarah's experience, silence usually meant the worst. They settled in to wait for extraction, knowing that their emergency beacon would guide friendly forces to their location. Standard protocol called for a rescue helicopter to arrive within 2 hours of activation. All they had to do was hold their position against whatever forces the Taliban could bring to bear. The first attack came 30 minutes later. A squad of fighters approached from the east, using the natural terrain to mask their advance until they were within 100 meters of the rally point. Sarah and engaged them with precise rifle fire, their muzzle flashes briefly illuminating the rocky landscape. The firefight lasted only minutes, but it established a pattern that would continue through the night. Small groups of enemy fighters would probe their defenses from different directions, testing their fields of fire and ammunition supplies. Each attack was beaten back, but each one also revealed the growing number of Taliban forces converging on their position. "Sir, we're running low on ammunition," Sarah reported after the fourth attack. Her remaining magazines were carefully rationed, each shot calculated for maximum effect. Dad checked his own supplies grimly. Same here, and no word from extraction. The eastern sky was beginning to show the first pale hints of dawn when the final attack came. This time, the Taliban didn't probe or test. They came in force, with at least 20 fighters attacking from multiple directions simultaneously, while the technical truck provided suppressing fire from longer range. Sarah's rifle clicked empty just as she saw take a hit. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the ground behind their defensive position. Blood stained his uniform as he struggled to reload his weapon with one functional arm. "I'm hit, but still in the fight," called out, though his voice carried the strain of injury and blood loss. Sarah's last magazine was down to 3 rounds when she heard the helicopters. But something was wrong. Instead of the distinctive sound of American rotors, these aircraft carried the heavier beat of Soviet-era machines. The Taliban had called in their own air support. The first rocket struck the rocks 20 meters away, showering them with debris and filling the air with smoke and dust. Sarah grabbed his arm and pulled him toward a deeper crevice in the rocks, knowing that their defensive position was about to become their tomb. That's when she saw them coming up the slope. Not enemy fighters this time, but a group of Taliban commanders accompanied by a squad of fighters carrying ropes and restraints. They weren't trying to kill the Americans anymore. They wanted prisoners. Sarah made her decision in that instant. With wounded and their ammunition exhausted, capture was inevitable. But she could ensure that only one of them would be taken. "Sir, there's a cave system about 200 meters north of here," she whispered urgently. "If you can make it there, you can hide until a real extraction team arrives." His eyes met hers, and she saw understanding flash across his face. "Negative, Lieutenant. We stick together." With respect, sir, that's not going to happen." Sarah chambered her last round and prepared to make the most important decision of her military career. The Taliban fighters were 50 meters away and closing fast when Sarah stood up and began walking toward them, her hands raised but her weapon still ready. She was buying time to escape, sacrificing her own freedom for his survival. But true to his character, refused to abandon his soldier. Instead of retreating to the cave system, he struggled to his feet and followed Sarah into what they both knew would be captivity or death. The Taliban fighters were surprisingly professional in their capture procedures. They separated the two Americans immediately, binding their hands with plastic restraints and blindfolding them before loading them into separate vehicles. Sarah's last glimpse of showed him pale from blood loss, but still alert, still fighting. The journey to the enemy stronghold took 3 hours over rough mountain roads. Sarah used the time to memorize every turn, every landmark she could identify through her blindfold. If an opportunity for escape presented itself, she would need to know exactly where she was. The Taliban compound where they were taken was larger, and Sarah's cell became her classroom, and survival became her curriculum. For 3 days, she observed every detail of her captors' routines with the methodical precision that had earned her reputation as the SEAL's most effective intelligence gatherer. The guards who believed she was just another helpless prisoner had no idea they were being studied by one of the most dangerous women in the world. The underground facility was more complex than she had initially realized. From the sounds echoing through the concrete corridors, she estimated at least 3 levels carved into the mountain's side. Heavy footsteps suggested the main guard force occupied the upper level, while lighter movements and occasional voices indicated administrative areas on her level. Below, she could hear the distant hum of generators and what sounded like communication equipment. Her Pashto language training, which the Taliban had dismissed as impossible for an American woman, proved invaluable. Through careful eavesdropping, she learned that Commander was being held in what the guards called the deep cells, a maximum security section 2 levels below her current location. More importantly, she discovered that he would be moved to a facility near the Pakistani border in 4 days. The guard rotation was predictable, almost military in its precision. Every 4 hours, the day shift would be replaced by fresh fighters. During the changeover, there was always a 15-minute window when the corridors were less heavily patrolled. Sarah filed this information away, along with every other detail that might prove useful. On the morning of her 4th day in captivity, everything changed. A new prisoner was brought in, and from the voices in the corridor, Sarah realized it was a local man accused of providing information to American forces. His terrified pleas echoed through the facility as he was dragged past her cell. That afternoon, Sarah heard the unmistakable sounds of an interrogation session. The man's screams carried through the concrete walls, each one a reminder of what awaited her, and if they remained captives much longer. The Taliban weren't just holding them for ransom or prisoner exchange. They were extracting information, and eventually they would turn their attention to the two Americans. That night, Sarah made her first attempt at escape. Using techniques learned during her SEER training, she had slowly worked one of the concrete blocks near the floor of her cell loose over the previous days. The gap was barely large enough for her to squeeze through, but it provided access to a maintenance corridor that ran behind the cells. The maintenance area was a network of service tunnels that provided access to the facility's electrical and water systems. Sarah moved through these passages like her namesake, her bare feet silent on the cold concrete. The layout was more extensive than she had imagined, with tunnels connecting all three levels of the complex. She found on her second night of exploration. He was being held in a reinforced cell designed for high-value prisoners, its steel door secured with both an electronic lock and a traditional deadbolt. Through a small ventilation grate, she could see him lying on a concrete bench, his wounded shoulder crudely bandaged but showing signs of infection. "Commander," she whispered through the grate, her voice barely audible. His head snapped up, his eyes searching the darkness until they found the source of the sound. Relief flooded his features when he recognized her voice. "Ghost, how the hell did you get here?" "The same way I'm getting you out, sir. But I need more time to plan the route and neutralize the security." His expression grew serious. "Sarah, listen to me. They've been asking questions about our operations, our team members, everything. So far, I've given them nothing but name, rank, and serial number, but they're getting impatient." "How much time do we have?" They mentioned bringing in a specialist interrogator tomorrow, someone who apparently has experience breaking American prisoners. His voice carried the strain of pain and exhaustion. "If this specialist is as good as they claim, I might not be able to hold out much longer." Sarah felt cold dread settle in her stomach. Military interrogation training prepared soldiers for standard techniques, but specialized interrogators often used methods that could break even the strongest will. If revealed operational details about SEAL Team 6, It could compromise missions and endanger dozens of American lives. Sir, I'm going to get you out of here tonight. Shook his head. The security is too tight, and I'm in no shape for a running fight. You should escape while you can and call in and on this facility. A negative, sir. No one gets left behind. The conversation was cut short by the sound of approaching footsteps. Sarah melted back into the shadows of the maintenance tunnel, watching as two guards conducted their routine security check. They peered through cell door, satisfied themselves that he was secure, and continued their patrol. Sarah spent the next 4 hours mapping every inch of the facility's security system. The electronic locks were controlled from a central security station on the upper level, manned by a single operator during the night shift. The backup generators were located in the lowest level, along with the communications equipment that kept the facility in contact with Taliban command. Her plan began to take shape. If she could disable the communications first, the facility would be cut off from outside support. Then, if she could reach the security station and override the electronic locks, she could free and create chaos throughout the complex. The confusion would provide cover for their escape through the service tunnels. But first, she needed weapons. The answer came from an unexpected source. During her exploration of the lower level, Sarah discovered a small armory carved into the natural rock. The room contained a mix of weapons ranging from Soviet-era rifles to more modern equipment apparently captured from coalition forces. More importantly, it held several grenades and blocks of plastic explosive. Acquiring weapons from the armory required patience and perfect timing. Sarah waited until the early morning hours when the facility was at its quietest, then made her move. The armory was secured with a simple padlock, which she defeated using lock-picking skills learned during her intelligence training. She selected her equipment carefully. 2 pistols with suppressors, a compact assault rifle, 4 grenades, and a block of C4 explosive with a timer. The weapons felt comfortable in her hands, familiar tools that transformed her from prisoner to predator. The communications room was her first target. Sarah accessed it through a ventilation shaft that required her to crawl through 50 meters of confined space. But the approach was undetected. The room housed sophisticated radio equipment that connected the facility to Taliban commanders throughout the region. She planted the C4 with a 30-minute timer, enough time to complete the next phase of her plan before the explosion would announce her escape attempt. The blast would not only destroy the communications equipment, but also create a diversion that would draw guards away from other areas of the facility. The security station proved more challenging. It was located at the center of the upper level, with clear in all directions. The single guard on duty was alert and heavily armed, his position chosen to provide early warning of any escape attempt. Sarah approached through the main corridor, using her suppressed pistol to eliminate two guards along the way. Their bodies wouldn't be discovered for hours if she was lucky, or minutes if she wasn't. Either way, she was committed to the plan now. The security station guard never saw her coming. Sarah emerged from a blind spot created by the room's equipment racks, her pistol eliminating the threat before he could raise an alarm. The control panel was more complex than she had hoped, with dozens of switches and indicators labeled in Arabic script. And trial and error revealed the lock controls, and within minutes, electronic locks throughout the facility began cycling open. Sarah could hear doors opening on all levels as prisoners were inadvertently freed alongside her intended target. The confusion would work in her favor, making it difficult for the remaining guards to determine what was happening. She reached cell just as the C4 detonated in the communications room. The explosion shook the entire facility, sending concrete dust raining from the ceiling and triggering emergency lighting throughout the complex. In the chaos that followed, Sarah was able to free and arm him with weapons from her small arsenal. Can you move, sir? Sarah asked as she cut the plastic restraints from his wrists. I'm functional, replied, though his pale complexion and labored breathing suggested otherwise. The infection in his shoulder wound was clearly affecting his strength, but his eyes remained focused and determined. They made it halfway to the service tunnel entrance before encountering their first serious resistance. A squad of Taliban fighters, apparently unaffected by the communications blackout, had organized a systematic search of the facility. The firefight that erupted in the narrow corridor was brief but intense. Sarah's suppressed weapons gave them the advantage of surprise, but wounded condition limited his effectiveness. After neutralizing 3 enemies, they were forced to fall back toward an alternative route that Sarah had mapped during her reconnaissance. "The ghost, I'm slowing you down," gasped as they paused in a storage alcove. Blood had soaked through his bandage, and his face was gray with pain and exhaustion. "Sir, with respect, shut up and keep moving." The service tunnel that led to the facility's exit was located near the motor pool, a large garage where the Taliban kept their vehicles. Sarah had identified it as their best route to freedom, but reaching it required crossing an open courtyard under floodlights. The explosion in the communications room had triggered additional security measures. Searchlights swept the compound while guards took positions at all exits. What had been a covert escape attempt was rapidly becoming a running battle. Sarah counted at least 20 enemy fighters between their position and the motor pool. The odds were heavily against them, but staying in the facility meant certain capture or death. Would never survive another interrogation session, and Sarah refused to let her commander down. "Sir, I'm going to create a diversion. When the shooting starts, you move for the motor pool. I'll meet you there." Grabbed her arm with his good hand. "Sarah, that's suicide. Those are direct orders. We stick together." "Sorry, sir, but I can't follow that order." Before could stop her, Sarah sprinted into the courtyard, her assault rifle chattering as she engaged targets across the compound. The sudden appearance of an armed escapee drew immediate attention, with guards converging on her position from multiple directions. The firefight that followed was the most intense of Sarah's career. Moving between vehicles and equipment in the motor pool, she used every technique learned in years of combat training. Her rifle eliminated targets with surgical precision, while she maneuvered constantly to avoid the concentrated fire directed at her position. Despite his wounds, provided supporting fire from the facility exit. His marksmanship was still exceptional, and his shots forced several enemy fighters to take cover rather than advancing on Sarah's position. Together, they created enough chaos to prevent the Taliban from organizing an effective response. Sarah's ammunition ran low just as she reached the vehicle she had selected for their escape. a Soviet-era truck with heavy armor plating. It was designed to survive improvised explosive devices and small arms fire. More importantly, it was fueled and ready to drive. Commander, move now. Sarah shouted across the compound as she started the truck's engine. They sprinted across the open ground, his wounded shoulder causing him to stumble but not stopping his advance. Sarah provided covering fire through the truck's gun port, keeping enemy fighters pinned down until reached the vehicle. The truck smashed through the compound's main gate, its armor deflecting small arms fire as they escaped into the mountain roads. Behind them, the Taliban facility erupted in chaos as guards attempted to organize pursuit while dealing with the damage from Sarah's sabotage. "Where are we headed?" asked as Sarah navigated the treacherous mountain roads by moonlight. "Rally Point Delta. It's a secondary extraction site about 20 miles from here. Should have coalition forces monitoring the area." The drive through enemy territory was harrowing. Taliban roadblocks forced them to take increasingly remote routes, and the truck's fuel gauge showed their supplies dwindling rapidly. Worse, condition was deteriorating. The stress of combat and escape had aggravated his infections, and he was running a dangerous fever. They abandoned the truck 5 miles from the rally point when it finally ran out of fuel. Was barely conscious by this time, forcing Sarah to support his weight as they covered the remaining distance on foot. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, and with daylight came the certainty of pursuing enemy forces. Rally Point Delta was a wind-swept plateau marked by distinctive rock formations that made it easily identifiable from the air. Sarah activated her emergency beacon and settled in to wait for extraction, knowing that their survival now depended on friendly forces reaching them before the Taliban did. This fever broke just as the first enemy vehicles appeared in the distance. His eyes cleared, and he managed a weak smile as he saw Sarah checking her remaining ammunition. "The Ghost, I want you to know something. What you did back there, walking into that facility to get me out, that's the bravest thing I've ever seen." Sarah kept her eyes on the approaching vehicles. "Sir, we're not out of this yet." "Maybe not, but I needed you to hear that. If we don't make it, I want you to know that you're the finest soldier I've ever served with." The extraction helicopter carried Sarah back to Forward Operating Base Chapman, where the reality of what she had accomplished began to sink in. As the aircraft descended toward the landing pad, she could see dozens of personnel gathered on the tarmac. Intelligence officers, medical teams, and senior commanders who had been following the rescue operation with intense interest. Colonel James Fletcher, the base commander, was waiting as Sarah stepped off the helicopter. His weathered face showed a mixture of relief and amazement as he approached her. In 30 years of military service, Fletcher had never encountered a single-handed rescue operation of this magnitude. Lieutenant, I need you to know that what you've done here is extraordinary, Fletcher said as they walked toward the debriefing center. The intelligence community is calling this one of the most significant rescue operations in recent military history. Sarah's response was characteristically modest. Sir, I just did what any member of the team would have done. Commander would have done the same for me. But Fletcher knew better. The facility that Sarah had infiltrated and destroyed had been under surveillance for months. Intelligence estimates suggested that at least 50 Taliban fighters had been based there, along with sophisticated communication equipment that coordinated insurgent activities across 3 provinces. One woman had neutralized the entire operation while simultaneously rescuing a high-value prisoner. The debriefing process took 12 hours, with intelligence specialists asking detailed questions about everything Sarah had observed during her captivity and escape. Maps were drawn, security procedures analyzed, and weapons captured from the facility were examined for intelligence value. Each detail added to a comprehensive picture of Taliban operations that would prove invaluable for future missions. Dr. Jennifer, the base psychologist, conducted a mandatory evaluation to assess Sarah's mental state following the trauma of capture and combat. What she found surprised even her experienced perspective. Lieutenant, most soldiers who experience what you've been through show significant signs of stress reaction. You appear to be processing these events with remarkable clarity. Sarah considered the question carefully. Ma'am, I think it's because I always knew I was going to get out. The mission wasn't about surviving captivity. It was about completing the rescue. Once I had a plan, everything else became just execution of tactical procedures. The doctor made notes in her file, recognizing the mindset of a truly exceptional warrior. Sarah's ability to compartmentalize trauma and focus on mission objectives had allowed her to function at peak efficiency under conditions that would have broken most people. Meanwhile, 2,000 miles away at Regional Medical Center in Germany, Commander was undergoing surgery to address the infection that had threatened his life. The medical team reported that Sarah's quick action in extracting him had likely saved his life. Another day in Taliban custody would have allowed the infection to reach a critical stage. News of the rescue operation spread quickly through the special operations community. Within hours, Sarah found herself receiving congratulations from SEAL teams across the globe, many of them expressing amazement at the audacity and success of her solo mission. The story became legendary almost immediately, with details growing more incredible with each retelling. But for Sarah, the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Chief Petty Officer Martinez, a fellow female warrior who had served 3 combat deployments, sought her out during the debriefing process. "Sarah, I need you to understand something," Martinez said as they sat in the base cafeteria. "What you did doesn't just matter for your team. It matters for every woman wearing this uniform. You just proved that gender means nothing when it comes to courage and capability." Sarah had never thought of her actions in those terms, but she began to understand the broader implications of her rescue mission. In a military culture that still questioned women's roles in direct combat, she had demonstrated conclusively that determination and skill were not limited by gender. The official investigation into the failed intelligence that had led to the ambush revealed troubling information. The Taliban had been fed detailed information about the SEAL team's planned operation, including their route, timing, and objectives. Someone within the Afghan government or military had provided this intelligence to the enemy. Lieutenant Colonel Michael, the intelligence officer leading the investigation, briefed Sarah on their findings 3 days after her return to base. The leak came from someone with access to classified operational planning. "We're looking at a limited number of suspects, but the investigation will take weeks to complete." "Sir, does this mean our operations in this region have been compromised?" That's exactly what it means, Lieutenant. Until we identify and neutralize the source, every mission in this area carries elevated risk. This revelation added another dimension to Sarah's rescue operation. By destroying the Taliban communication center, she had not only facilitated her escape, but had also disrupted the enemy's intelligence network at a critical time. Several planned attacks against coalition forces had been prevented when the insurgents lost their coordination capabilities. General Hammond, commander of Special Operations Forces Central Command, arrived at the base on the fourth day to personally debrief Sarah. Hammond was herself a pioneering figure, one of the first women to reach flag rank in the Special Operations community. Lieutenant, I've read the initial reports, but I want to hear the story directly from you. Start with your decision to surrender rather than fight to the death. Sarah recounted the events methodically, from the ambush at the compound through the final extraction. Hammond listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, but mostly focusing intently on Sarah's narrative. Well, when you decided to infiltrate the Taliban facility, did you have a complete escape plan? No, ma'am. I had identified potential routes and weaknesses in their security, but the plan evolved as I gathered more intelligence. The key was remaining flexible and adapting to changing circumstances. Hammond nodded approvingly. That's the hallmark of exceptional special operations thinking. Rigid plans break under pressure, but adaptable warriors find ways to succeed. The conversation continued for 2 hours, with Hammond probing every aspect of Sarah's decision-making process. What emerged was a picture of a soldier who combined technical competence with intuitive tactical thinking, someone who could operate effectively in situations where conventional approaches would fail. Lieutenant, I'm recommending you for the Silver Star. Your actions represent the finest traditions of American military service. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the recognition, but Hammond wasn't finished. More importantly, I'm recommending you for immediate promotion and assignment to a classified program that I think would benefit from your unique capabilities. The classified program turned out to be a joint task force focused on high-risk personnel recovery operations. Sarah would be working with an elite team drawn from all branches of the military, specializing in missions that conventional forces couldn't accomplish. But before accepting any new assignment, Sarah had one priority: visiting Commander during his recovery in Germany. The flight gave Sarah time to process everything that had happened. In the space of a week, she had gone from routine special operations soldier to decorated war hero. The transformation felt surreal, but the constant stream of messages from fellow warriors reminded her that her actions had resonated throughout the military community. He was awake and alert when Sarah arrived at his hospital room. His shoulder was immobilized in a complex brace, but his eyes showed the clarity that had returned as the infection was brought under control. "Ghost, you look terrible," he said with a grin that belied his own pale appearance. Sir, with respect, you're not exactly ready for a magazine cover yourself." They talked for hours, filling in details that the official debriefings had missed. Described his interrogation experience, confirming that the Taliban had indeed been seeking specific information about SEAL team procedures and capabilities. His resistance had prevented them from obtaining anything useful, but it had come at a significant physical cost. "Sarah, I need to tell you something that I couldn't say in the official reports," said as their conversation wound down. "When I saw you walk into that compound with your hands up, I thought you had given up. It wasn't until I heard those explosions that I realized you were playing a completely different game. Sir, I learned from the best. You always taught us that the most dangerous enemy is the one who looks defeated but isn't." This expression grew serious. "What you did goes beyond training or courage. You redefined what's possible for a single operator in hostile territory. Military academies are going to be studying your mission for decades." The prediction proved accurate. Within months, Sarah's rescue operation became a case study in military leadership courses, analyzed for its tactical innovation and psychological insights. The official title given to the case study was Individual Initiative in Extreme Circumstances, but everyone in the Special Operations community knew it simply as the Ghost Mission. Sarah's promotion to lieutenant commander was announced during a ceremony attended by senior officers from across the Special Operations community. The Silver Star citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States, while serving with distinction in combat operations." But the most meaningful moment came when, still recovering from his injuries, presented her with a small medallion bearing the SEAL team insignia. This belonged to my grandfather, who served with the underwater demolition teams in World War II. It's been carried by 3 generations of warriors, and now I want you to have it. Sarah accepted the medallion with emotions she rarely showed. "Sir, I can't take this. It belongs to your family." "The Ghost, you are family. What you did proves that the bonds between warriors transcend everything else. Grandfather would have been proud to see it carried by someone like you." The ceremony concluded with Sarah's formal assignment to the Joint Personnel Recovery Task Force. Her new role would take her around the world, working with international partners to develop and execute rescue operations in hostile territory. Colonel Fletcher, who had observed Sarah's transformation from routine SEAL to legendary warrior, approached her after the ceremony with final thoughts. "Lieutenant Commander, I've seen a lot of heroes in my time. But what makes you different is that you don't think of yourself as one. That humility, combined with your capabilities, makes you the most dangerous kind of operator." Sir, I just did what the mission required." That's exactly what I mean. Most people think heroism is about grand gestures and dramatic moments. Real heroism is about doing what needs to be done, regardless of the cost or recognition. As Sarah prepared to leave for her new assignment, she reflected on the events that had changed her life. The rescue of Commander had started as a promise between teammates and had become something much larger, a demonstration of the values that defined military service at its finest. The Taliban facility that had seemed impregnable had fallen to one determined woman with a clear mission and unshakable resolve. The 50 fighters who had surrounded her had been outmaneuvered by superior planning and execution. The sophisticated security systems had been defeated by patience and technical skill. But most importantly, the bond between warriors had proven stronger than any obstacle the enemy could place in their path. Standing at the departure gate for her flight to the 6 months, After the rescue operation that made her a legend, Lieutenant Commander Sarah found herself in a classified briefing room deep within the Pentagon, surrounded by the most senior officers in the American military establishment. The Joint Personnel Recovery Task Force had proven so successful that its missions were now being briefed directly to the Secretary of Defense. General Hammond entered the room with an air of purpose that immediately commanded attention. Behind her followed Admiral James, Chief of Naval Operations, and General from Marine Forces Special Operations Command. The presence of such high-ranking officials indicated that Sarah's new assignment would be far more significant than routine personnel recovery. "Ladies and," General Hammond began, "what you're about to hear is classified at the highest levels. 3 days ago, a CIA operative was captured while investigating weapons smuggling operations along the Syrian-Turkish border. Traditional rescue options have been ruled out due to the political sensitivity of the location. Admiral activated a wall-mounted display showing satellite imagery of a remote compound nestled in mountainous terrain. The operative, Phoenix, has intelligence that could compromise ongoing operations across the Middle East if extracted by hostile forces. We have perhaps 72 hours before that information is obtained through enhanced interrogation techniques. Sarah studied the images carefully, her trained eye immediately identifying the challenges presented by the target location. The compound was isolated, heavily fortified, and surrounded by terrain that would make conventional assault extremely difficult. Worse, it was located in disputed territory where American military operations would create significant diplomatic complications. "Sir, what's our intelligence on enemy strength and capabilities?" asked Major Carlos Vega, the task force's intelligence specialist. The general took over the briefing. "Satellite reconnaissance indicates approximately 30 fighters, but we believe the actual number could be higher. The group holding Phoenix is connected to international arms trafficking networks and has access to sophisticated weaponry, including anti-aircraft systems." The political complications were even more daunting than the tactical challenges. The compound's location meant that any rescue operation would technically violate the sovereignty of a nation that was nominally allied with the United States. Official military action was impossible, which left only covert options. That's where Lieutenant Commander's unique experience becomes critical, General Hammond continued. The success of her previous solo operation has convinced us that certain situations require approaches that conventional forces simply cannot provide. Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Ma'am, are you asking me to conduct another single-operator rescue mission? That's exactly what we're asking. Your demonstrated ability to infiltrate hostile facilities, adapt to changing circumstances, and execute complex operations without support makes you the ideal candidate for this mission. The briefing continued for 3 hours, with intelligence specialists providing detailed analysis of the target compound, enemy capabilities, and extraction options. What emerged was a picture of extraordinary complexity that would challenge even Sarah's proven abilities. The operative Phoenix was being held in a facility that had been designed specifically to prevent rescue attempts. Multiple layers of security, sophisticated alarm systems, and a location that could be easily defended against assault made it nearly impregnable to conventional forces. Ma'am, assuming I can successfully infiltrate the facility and locate Phoenix, what are my extraction options? Sarah asked, already beginning to formulate preliminary plans. Admiral indicated a series of locations on the tactical map. We can position assets here, here, and here, he said, pointing to locations roughly 10 miles from the target. But any closer proximity would risk detection and compromise the mission. 10 miles of hostile territory between the target and safety. Sarah had faced worse odds, but never in terrain this challenging. The route to safety would take her through mountain passes controlled by multiple armed groups, some friendly to the west, others decidedly hostile. There's one additional complication, General added grimly. Intelligence suggests that Phoenix may have been injured during capture. We don't know the extent of those injuries, but you should prepare for the possibility that your subject may not be capable of independent movement. Sarah absorbed this information without reaction, though internally she was already modifying her tactical approach. Carrying an injured operative through 10 miles of enemy territory would require careful planning and probably some luck. When do I deploy? 1800 hours today. You'll insert via halo jump approximately 20 miles from the target, then move overland to conduct reconnaissance and execute the rescue. The remaining hours before deployment passed quickly. Sarah reviewed satellite imagery until she could navigate the target area in her sleep, memorized radio frequencies and emergency procedures, and selected equipment appropriate for a solo operation in hostile territory. The gear reflected the complexity of the mission. In addition to her standard weapons and survival equipment, Sarah carried advanced communication devices, medical supplies for treating serious injuries, and specialized tools for defeating electronic security systems. Every piece of equipment had been carefully chosen for maximum utility with minimum weight. The halo jump was conducted from 30,000 feet, with Sarah's aircraft following a flight path that would avoid detection by radar systems in the region. Free-falling through the darkness above enemy territory, she felt the familiar calm that preceded major operations. Landing in the designated drop zone, Sarah immediately began the 20-mile movement to her target. The terrain was even more challenging than satellite imagery had suggested, with rocky slopes and deep ravines that forced constant route adjustments. Local knowledge would have been invaluable, but this was exactly the type of mission where such support was impossible to obtain. The first day of movement took her through territory controlled by Kurdish fighters who were nominally allied with American forces. Sarah avoided contact, knowing that even friendly encounters could compromise operational security. Her passage through the area was undetected, leaving no trace that could alert hostile forces to her presence. The second day brought her into disputed territory where control shifted between various armed groups depending on political alliances and tactical circumstances. Sarah moved only during darkness, using daytime hours to observe enemy activity and plan her route for the following night. On the third day, she reached an observation position overlooking the target compound. The satellite imagery had been accurate, but seeing the facility firsthand revealed details that photographs couldn't capture. The security was even more sophisticated than intelligence had suggested. The compound consisted of a central building surrounded by smaller structures, all enclosed within a high wall topped with razor wire. Guard towers at each corner provided overlapping fields of fire across the approaches, and thermal imaging revealed multiple patrol teams conducting regular sweeps of the perimeter. Most concerning was the presence of technical vehicles mounted with heavy weapons positioned at strategic locations around the compound. These vehicles could respond rapidly to any breach and had the firepower to devastate attacking forces. Sarah counted at least 6 such positions, each manned by crews who appeared to be well-trained and alert. Electronic surveillance systems presented another layer of challenge. Sarah could identify camera positions, motion detectors, and what appeared to be ground-penetrating radar designed to detect tunnel approaches. The facility had clearly been designed by people who understood modern security technology. But Sarah also identified potential vulnerabilities. The compound's water supply came from an external source, requiring buried pipes that created potential infiltration routes. The electrical systems appeared to rely on generators that were housed in structures outside the main defensive perimeter. Most importantly, the sophisticated security systems created blind spots where human guards relied too heavily on electronic monitoring. Her plan began to take shape over 2 days of careful observation. Rather than attempting to breach the main defenses, she would infiltrate through the water system, disable communications and power from inside the facility, and create enough confusion to mask her movements while locating and extracting Phoenix. The infiltration began at 200 hours on the 5th night of the operation. Sarah accessed the water system through a maintenance point located half a mile from the compound, following the underground pipes toward her target. The confined space was claustrophobic, but it provided undetected access to the heart of the facility. Emerging from the water system required precise timing to avoid detection by electronic sensors. Sarah had identified a 15-second window when guard patrols would be transitioning between positions, creating a brief gap in surveillance coverage. The interior of the compound was even more heavily defended than the perimeter. Sarah moved through the facility like her namesake, avoiding guards and electronic sensors with the expertise that had made her legendary. Each room was carefully searched, but Phoenix was not in any of the obvious detention areas. The search led her to a sub-basement that had not appeared on satellite imagery, a reinforced area designed for holding high-value prisoners. The electronic lock securing this area was more sophisticated than anything Sarah had encountered, requiring nearly an hour to defeat using specialized equipment. The Phoenix was in the third cell she checked, and the operative's condition was worse than intelligence had suggested. Dr. Jennifer, a CIA analyst who had been investigating arms trafficking networks, was conscious, but showed signs of serious injuries, including what appeared to be a broken leg and possible internal bleeding. "Are you here to get me out?" whispered as Sarah knelt beside her. That's the plan. Can you move?" "I can try, but I'm not going to be much help in a running fight." Sarah quickly assessed injuries and administered pain medication from her medical kit. The broken leg would need to be immobilized, and general weakness suggested significant blood loss from internal injuries. This was going to be far more challenging than Sarah had hoped. The extraction from the sub-basement required improvisation. Sarah used equipment from her kit to create a makeshift stretcher that would allow her to move while maintaining some mobility for defensive purposes. The process took precious time, and Sarah knew that extended presence in the facility increased the risk of detection. They were halfway to the exit when the alarm sounded. The penetrating wail of sirens filled the compound as emergency lighting activated throughout the facility. Sarah heard boots pounding on concrete as guards responded to the security breach, their shouts echoing through the corridors as they began a systematic search. "What's happening?" asked, fear evident in her voice despite her training. "Someone found the guards I neutralized getting in here. We need to move faster." But moving faster with an injured operative through a facility full of armed searchers was easier said than done. Sarah was forced to take increasingly indirect routes to avoid contact, and each detour brought them closer to discovery. The running battle that erupted near the compound's exit was everything Sarah had hoped to avoid. Carrying while engaging multiple armed opponents required every skill she had developed through years of combat experience. Her suppressed weapons provided some advantage, but the sheer number of enemies made the situation desperate. "Leave me and go," insisted as bullets sparked off the walls around them. "Don't let my mistakes cost you your life." "Not happening," Sarah replied, her rifle eliminating another threat. "We both go home or neither of us does." The statement would have sounded like bravado from most soldiers, but from Sarah it was simply a statement of fact. She had walked into Taliban strongholds to rescue teammates before, and she would do whatever was necessary to bring Phoenix to safety. The compound's walls were 50 meters away when Sarah's ammunition began running low. She had been carrying a combat load appropriate for a covert operation, not a sustained firefight against overwhelming odds. Each remaining round would need to count. That's when the explosion shook the entire facility. The blast came from the direction of the main building, followed seconds later by a chain reaction of secondary explosions. Sarah's sabotage of the power systems had apparently triggered something much more dramatic than intended, possibly stored ammunition or fuel supplies. The confusion created by the explosions provided exactly the diversion Sarah needed. Guards throughout the compound turned their attention toward the fires and destruction in the central area, allowing Sarah and to reach the outer wall undetected. Getting over the wall with an injured operative required Sarah to use climbing equipment she had brought for emergency situations. Gritted her teeth against the pain as Sarah hauled her up the rope, but she made no sound that would alert the guards. They dropped into the rocky terrain beyond the compound, just as additional explosions rocked the facility behind them. Whatever Sarah had accidentally triggered was turning the entire compound into an inferno, with ammunition stores detonating in spectacular displays of secondary explosions. Jesus, whispered as she looked back at the destruction. "What did you do in there?" "Oh, honestly, I'm not entirely sure. But it's giving us the diversion we need to get out of here." The 10-mile movement to the extraction point was going to be the most challenging part of the operation. Injuries made rapid movement impossible, and the explosions at the compound would soon attract attention from every armed group in the region. The 5-mile journey to the extraction point became a deadly game of cat and mouse across some of the most unforgiving terrain in the world. Sarah carried the injured CIA operative through mountain passes where one misstep could mean a fatal fall, while enemy search teams closed in from 3 directions. Dr. Jennifer's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Despite Sarah's field medical treatment, internal bleeding was taking its toll, and the broken leg was causing excruciating pain with every movement. But never complained, understanding that both their lives depended on reaching the extraction point. Contact left 200 meters, whispered, pointing toward movement on a distant ridge. Sarah immediately altered course, using a dry creek bed to mask their movement from the search team. Her knowledge of small unit tactics was keeping them alive, but each course correction added precious minutes to their journey time. The radio crackled with urgent communications. Ghost, this is Overwatch. Multiple hostile forces converging on your area. We count at least 4 separate groups conducting coordinated search operations. What's your status? Overwatch, we're mobile but slowed by injured package. ETA to extraction point 45 minutes if we can maintain current pace. Copy that, Ghost. Be advised that one of the search teams has vehicles and is moving to block your route to the primary extraction site. You may need to divert to the secondary location. Sarah checked her GPS coordinates and cursed silently. The secondary extraction point was 8 miles away across terrain that would be nearly impossible to traverse with an injured operative. They had to reach the primary site, regardless of the obstacles. The solution came from an unexpected source. As they crested a ridge overlooking the extraction zone, Sarah spotted a convoy of Kurdish fighters moving along a road that paralleled their route. The Kurdish forces were nominally allied with American operations, but contact with them could compromise the covert nature of her mission. Phoenix, I need you to make a decision, Sarah said as she studied the tactical situation through her night vision scope. I can try to make contact with those Kurdish fighters and request assistance, but it means revealing our presence to people who might not keep quiet about American operations in this area. The response was immediate. Do whatever you think is best. You're the expert here. Sarah made her choice. Using a small signaling device, she transmitted an emergency code that identified her as an American operative requiring assistance. The response came within minutes. 3 Kurdish fighters detached from the convoy and began moving toward their position. The meeting was conducted in a mixture of Kurdish, Arabic, and broken English. Sarah identified herself only as an American soldier conducting a rescue operation, while the Kurdish commander, a weathered veteran named, asked no unnecessary questions. Americans helped my village last year, explained in accented English. We help you now. The assistance proved invaluable. Fighters provided a stretcher for and guided them along routes that avoided the enemy search teams. More importantly, they established communications with other Kurdish units in the area, creating a network that monitored hostile movements and provided early warning of threats. With Kurdish assistance, the journey to the extraction point was completed in half the time Sarah had estimated. Condition stabilized somewhat with the improved transportation, and the security provided by Allied fighters eliminated the constant threat of ambush. The extraction site was a small clearing surrounded by rocky outcroppings that provided excellent defensive positions. Sarah and the Kurdish fighters established a perimeter while they waited for the arrival of American aircraft, knowing that the next few minutes would determine the success or failure of the entire operation. The Ghost, this is Dragon Flight. We're inbound to your location, ETA 8 minutes. Be advised that hostile aircraft are operating in the area. We may have company during extraction. Sarah acknowledged the transmission while checking condition one final time. The CIA operative was conscious but weak, her face pale from blood loss despite the medical treatment she had received. Getting her to advanced medical care was now critical for her survival. The sound of rotors echoed across the mountainous terrain as 2 Black Hawk helicopters approached the landing zone. Sarah activated a strobe light to mark their position, knowing that the signal would also reveal their location to any enemy forces in the area. The helicopters were still 2 minutes out when the first enemy fighters appeared on the surrounding. Sarah counted muzzle flashes from at least a dozen positions as hostile forces opened fire on the landing zone. Taking fire from multiple positions, Sarah called into her radio as bullets kicked up dust around the landing zone. Request immediate suppression of enemy positions. The response came in the form of precision strikes from the helicopter's weapons systems. Rockets and machine gun fire swept forcing the enemy fighters to take cover and disrupting their aimed fire at the landing zone. But the enemy had also called for reinforcements. Sarah could hear vehicles approaching from multiple directions, and her Kurdish allies reported that larger forces were converging on their position. The extraction window was rapidly closing. The first helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and debris, its crew chief immediately jumping out to assist with loading the injured operative. Was carried aboard on a stretcher while Sarah provided covering fire against increasingly aggressive enemy probes. "Go get her out of here," Sarah shouted to the helicopter crew as enemy fire intensified. "I'll take the second bird." But as the first helicopter lifted off, the second aircraft was forced to abort its landing approach when rocket-propelled grenades began exploding around the landing zone. Enemy forces had brought heavier weapons to bear, making the extraction site too dangerous for aircraft operations. The Ghost, this is Dragon 2. Landing zone is too hot. We need to find an alternative extraction site. Sarah's heart sank as she realized the implications. Was safely aboard the first helicopter, but Sarah was now stranded in hostile territory with limited ammunition and growing enemy forces surrounding her position. The Kurdish commander appeared beside her position with grim news. "More fighters coming, many vehicles. We must move now or we all die here." The Kurdish fighters had risked their lives to help with the rescue, and Sarah refused to let them pay the price for American operations. "Take your men and get out of here. This isn't your fight anymore." "No," the Kurdish veteran replied firmly. "We started this together, we finished together." What followed was a running battle across 6 miles of mountain terrain as Sarah and her Kurdish allies attempted to reach a secondary extraction point, while enemy forces pursued them with increasing desperation. The explosion at the original compound had apparently eliminated someone important, and hostile forces were determined that no one would escape to report what they had seen. Sarah's ammunition ran dangerously low as they fought their way through 3 separate ambushes. Her Kurdish allies shared their supplies, but their weapons used different calibers that weren't compatible with her equipment. Each engagement forced her to be increasingly selective with her fire. The breakthrough came when American aircraft arrived overhead to provide close air support. F-16 fighters began engaging enemy vehicles and concentrations of fighters, their precision strikes breaking up the coordinated pursuit that had been closing in on the escape party. The Ghost, this is Falcon Lead. We've got eyes on multiple hostile forces pursuing your position, marking targets for engagement now. The airstrikes bought precious time, but they also revealed the scale of the enemy response. Sarah counted at least 8 vehicles and more than 50 fighters involved in the pursuit, far more than intelligence estimates had suggested were operating in the area. The secondary extraction point was a narrow valley that barely provided enough space for helicopter operations. Sarah and the Kurdish fighters reached it just as American helicopters were beginning their approach, but enemy forces were close behind. The extraction itself was conducted under fire, with Kurdish fighters providing a protective perimeter while Sarah boarded the rescue helicopter. As the aircraft lifted off, she could see, and his men beginning their own withdrawal, their vehicles kicking up clouds of dust as they disappeared into the mountain terrain. The Ghost, welcome aboard, the helicopter crew chief shouted over the noise of the rotors. Phoenix is stable and en route to medical care. Mission accomplished. But Sarah's thoughts were with the Kurdish fighters who had risked everything to help her complete the rescue. Their assistance had made the difference between success and failure, and she made a mental note to ensure that their contribution was properly recognized in the mission reports. The flight back to friendly territory gave Sarah time to reflect on what she had accomplished. The rescue of Doctor had prevented critical intelligence from falling into enemy hands, but it had also revealed the existence of a much larger hostile network than anyone had realized. The debriefing process began immediately upon Sarah's return to base. Intelligence specialists were particularly interested in her observations about enemy capabilities and organization, information that would prove crucial for future operations in the region. General Hammond personally conducted the final debrief, her questions focusing on the tactical innovations that had made the mission successful. Lieutenant Commander, Your decision to work with local Kurdish forces was not part of the original plan. What led you to take that risk? Ma'am, the tactical situation required adaptation. The Kurdish fighters proved to be professional allies who understood the importance of the mission. Hammond nodded approvingly. Your ability to form effective partnerships with local forces under extreme circumstances demonstrates exactly the kind of thinking we need in special operations. The official recognition came in the form of a second Silver Star and promotion to full commander rank. But more importantly, Sarah's rescue operations had proven the value of specialized personnel recovery capabilities, leading to expanded funding and resources for similar missions. The doctor recovered fully from her injuries and personally thanked Sarah during a ceremony at CIA headquarters. The intelligence that had gathered before her capture led to the disruption of several major arms trafficking networks, validating the risks taken to extract her safely. The commander said during their private meeting, I need you to understand that what you did went far beyond rescuing one operative. The intelligence I gathered has prevented weapons from reaching terrorist groups across 3 continents. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The Kurdish commander who had assisted with the rescue sent a message through military channels expressing his gratitude and respect for Sarah's leadership under fire. Tell the American woman warrior that she fights with the heart of our people, the message read. She will always be welcome among the Kurds. As Sarah prepared for her next assignment, she reflected on how her career had evolved from routine special operations to legendary rescue missions. Each operation had presented unique challenges that required innovation and adaptation, qualities that had become her signature strengths. A commander, now fully recovered and serving in a senior leadership position, provided the final perspective on Sarah's achievements during a private conversation. Ghost, do you realize what you've accomplished? You've redefined what's possible for individual operators in hostile territory. Military doctrine is being rewritten based on your missions. Sarah's response was characteristic. Sir, I just did what the mission required. The real credit belongs to the people who trusted me with these assignments and the allies who supported me in the field. smiled at the modest response. That attitude is exactly why you've been so successful. You understand that true leadership isn't about personal glory. It's about accomplishing the mission and taking care of your people. The conversation concluded with delivering new orders that would take Sarah to yet another challenging assignment. The global war on terrorism continued to create situations where conventional forces couldn't operate effectively, and specialized capabilities like Sarah's were increasingly in demand. Standing on the tarmac as her transportation prepared for departure, Sarah thought about the Kurdish fighters who had helped save her life, the CIA operative who was now safely back in the field, and the Taliban commander who had learned too late that capturing American personnel was far more dangerous than he had realized. Each mission had reinforced the fundamental truth that had guided her career from the beginning. No mission was impossible if you were willing to adapt, improvise, and never abandon the people counting on you. The aircraft engines started with a roar that carried Sarah toward her next assignment and whatever challenges awaited her there. Behind her, she left a legacy of successful operations that had proven the value of individual courage and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. In the years that followed, military historians would debate the tactical innovations that made Sarah's missions so successful. Special operations schools would study her decision-making process and adaptive strategies. Intelligence agencies would develop new protocols based on the lessons learned from her operations. But for Sarah, the true measure of success remained simple. She had kept her promises to fellow warriors who trusted her with their lives, and she had brought everyone home safely. In a world where heroes were often defined by publicity and recognition, Sarah had chosen a different path. Her heroism was measured not by the medals she received or the recognition she earned, but by the lives she saved and the missions she accomplished when no one else could. The aircraft climbed into the night sky, carrying Commander Sarah, Ghost, toward another classified mission in another hostile location. Somewhere in the darkness below, enemy forces who had never heard her name were about to discover why she had become the most feared rescue specialist in the American military. Because Sarah had learned something that her enemies never understood. The most dangerous person in any fight is the one who refuses to accept defeat, no matter what the odds. And Sarah had never accepted defeat in her life. Sarah had planned for this contingency, identifying several hide sites along the route where they could take cover if pursuit became too intense. The first of these was a cave system located 3 miles from the compound, far enough to avoid immediate search, but close enough to reach before condition deteriorated further. They made it to the cave just as the first search helicopters appeared over the compound. Sarah could hear the aircraft circling the area, their crews probably trying to make sense of the destruction and determine whether this was an attack by rival groups or something more significant. How long until extraction? Asked as Sarah checked her injuries and administered additional medication. Then 6 hours if we can reach the primary site, 12 if we have to use the backup location. This condition was stable but not improving. The pain medication was helping, but she was showing signs of shock that suggested internal bleeding was continuing. Sarah made the decision to call for emergency extraction, knowing that the radio transmission would reveal their location to anyone monitoring communications in the area. The response came within minutes. "Ghost, this is Overwatch. We copy your request for emergency extraction. Be advised that hostile forces are converging on your area from multiple directions. We're accelerating the timeline, but you need to reach the primary extraction point. 5 miles of mountain terrain with an injured operative, while enemy forces closed in from all directions. Sarah checked her remaining ammunition and medical supplies, calculating odds that were significantly worse than anything she had faced before. But then again, people had been underestimating Lieutenant Commander Sarah for her entire career. Tonight would not be the night that changed. The W assignment. Sarah received a final message from Ghost. Remember that what you accomplished wasn't just about rescue techniques or tactical skills. It was about refusing to accept defeat when someone you cared about was in danger. That's the quality that will define your career from now on. Sarah smiled as she read the message, understanding its deeper meaning. Her reputation would open doors and create opportunities, but her true strength would always come from the same source that had driven her to walk into that Taliban compound loyalty to the warriors who stood beside her in battle. The flight to her new assignment carried her toward a future filled with classified missions and dangerous operations. But it also carried her toward a legacy that would inspire generations of soldiers who would read about the night when Lieutenant Sarah disappeared into an enemy stronghold and emerged with her commander's life. In the special operations community, legends were rare and usually exaggerated. But sometimes, very rarely, reality exceeded even the most dramatic stories. Sarah's rescue of Commander was one of those times. The sound of rotors echoed across the plateau, and Sarah felt hope surge through her exhausted body. Two Apache gunships appeared over the southern ridge, their distinctive silhouettes unmistakable against the morning sky. Behind them, a rescue helicopter was already beginning its approach to the landing zone. The Taliban vehicles scattered as the Apache engaged with rockets and chain guns, their superior firepower quickly overwhelming the pursuit force. Within minutes, the threat was neutralized, and the rescue helicopter was touching down just meters from Sarah's position. As medical personnel loaded onto a stretcher, he caught Sarah's hand one final time. That's an order, Lieutenant. Remember what I told you. Sarah watched the helicopter disappear into the distance, carrying her commander to safety and medical treatment. The mission that had started as a routine raid had become something far more significant. It had proven that loyalty between soldiers could overcome any obstacle, and that sometimes the most dangerous person on the battlefield was the one who fought not for glory or victory, but for the life of a friend. The official report would list the operation as a successful escape and evasion exercise. But Sarah knew the truth. It had been something much rarer and more valuable, a perfect example of why the motto, "Leave no one behind," was more than just words to the warriors who lived by it. Standing alone on the plateau as the sun rose over Afghanistan, Sarah felt the weight of what she had accomplished. She had walked into hell to bring back a brother in arms, and hell had given him back. Now it was time to go home. More sophisticated than intelligence had suggested. Sarah counted at least 50 fighters during her brief glimpse of the facility before being dragged into an underground detention area. The construction was professional, with reinforced concrete walls and multiple levels of security. They separated her from immediately, taking him deeper into the complex while she was placed in a small cell carved out of the mountain itself. The accommodations were Spartan but not deliberately cruel, suggesting that their captors valued them as intelligence assets rather than simply as enemies to be eliminated. Hour by hour through that first day, Sarah began planning her escape and rescue. She had made him a promise when she chose to surrender rather than fight to the death. That promise would either be kept or she would die trying to keep it. The guards changed shifts every 4 hours, and Sarah began timing their routines with the precision that had made her legendary among the SEALs. Every detail mattered. Every weakness in their security would be and remembered. The 3 days into her captivity, Sarah learned that was being held in a separate facility somewhere within the complex. The guards spoke freely around her, apparently believing that she couldn't understand Pashto. That mistake would prove costly. Commander Jake was alive, but he was also the Taliban's most valuable prisoner. They planned to move him to a more secure location within the week, somewhere that would put him beyond any hope of rescue. Sarah had 7 days to get him out. 7 days to accomplish what a fully equipped SEAL team would consider nearly impossible. But then again, nobody had ever accused Lieutenant Sarah, Ghost, of being ordinary.